wanted an Isthmian canal, and they'd actually sent a lot of explorers and surveyors all through Central America looking for the best routes. But before they could actually action anything, in stepped Ferdinand de Lesseps, the builder of the Suez Canal, and the described as the presiding genius of the 19th century.
And when was this?
This is in 1880. He sets up a company, raises money from the patriotic French public who see this as something that will be to the glory of France, and re-establish its pride. They've, of course, recently lost the Franco-Prussian War, and they rush out to Panama and decide to build a sea-level canal, like the Suez Canal. De Lesseps decided this before he'd even been to Panama, because this was easier to sell. No one wants locks. You want to just sail straight through as you can at Suez. And this was really the beginning of, well, one of the great engineering disasters in history.
So why was it such a disaster?
Well, pretty much everything that could go wrong went wrong for the French effort. There was political instability. There was a revolution at one point. There was an earthquake. There were floods. There were fires. De Lesseps seriously underestimated the size of the job that he had undertaken. That sea-level canal was not feasible. They'd still be digging it now, because every time you dig, you have a landslide because of this geology. And it was really a task too big for a private company. There just wasn't enough money in the world to make this happen. And as sort of progress stalled, the cost of the money that he borrowed went up and up and up. But probably more than anything, it was the mosquito that destroyed the French effort.
The mosquito spreading malaria in particular, other diseases?
Lots of malaria, and particularly vicious types of malaria, but also probably more sort of terrifying was yellow fever. Something like 3/4 of the young French engineers who went out there would be dead within 3 months.
And in the end, then, what was the extent of the disaster? How many people died building that, or trying to build that first French effort?
Well, the rough estimate is something like 25,000.
Wow.
And this wasn't just the workers. There's a story, there's a guy called Jules Danglais who went out. He was a very distinguished French engineer. He went out in 1885. And one of the sort of theories about yellow fever was that it came about through immoral behavior. So in order to prove, as he said, only the drunk and dissipated die of yellow fever, Danglais brought with him his wife, his daughter's fiancé, and his son. And within about 3 months, his daughter Louise, who was 19, and had made a great impact on sort of social life in Panama City, and she contracted yellow fever. And then her brother contracted yellow fever. Both of them died. Then the fiancé also died. And each time, Danglais was back at his desk the next morning working on this canal. But then about 3 months later, his wife died, completing the entire destruction of his family. And at that point, he returned to France, and he himself died soon after. So this was something that was affecting everyone from the most humble pick and shovel man to the director of the whole project.
So you said that 25,000 people died. Were they mostly French, or were the workers coming from somewhere else?
Most of the workers for the French period came from Jamaica, which was very impoverished, and this offered an opportunity to earn a little bit more money than you would back at home. There were also people from all over Central America and also from Colombia. And some of them would have had some immunity to yellow fever and malaria, but there was plenty of other diseases. There was typhoid, cholera, black water fever. It was an extremely unhealthy place.
So the French attempt failed, but the Americans were still keen.
If you look at the American canal effort, they take over in 1904 through various nefarious methods, and they basically repeat all of the mistakes of the French. They set out to build a sea-level canal, and the doctor in charge of the project, a guy called William Gorgas, was given the backing to wage war on the yellow fever mosquito, which he did, and with extraordinary amount of money and extraordinary effort. There was screening, there was the clearing vegetation, there was the disposal of any sort of water where the mosquito could breed, And the yellow fever mosquito stays very close to human habitation, so it's fairly manageable. And in November 1905, a year later, he was able to, in his hospital, to say to his fellow doctors, this is the last yellow fever death you are going to see in Panama. And he was right. No one else died of yellow fever. The workers, on the other hand, suffered a great deal from industrial accidents and from particularly bronchial illnesses, pneumonia. So this is very primitive working conditions and very dangerous. And, you know, a pretty epic sacrifice on the behalf of those West Indian workers.
We have Donald Trump's claim, 35,000 Americans lost to the mosquito in the building of the Panama Canal. Just run us through what you think the real numbers are.
Well, in order to get to that number, you have to sort of fold in lots of different events, really. There's the building of the Panama Railroad in the 1850s, in which some 10,000 died, of whom maybe a couple of hundred were Americans. They probably died of cholera rather than from the mosquito. There is the French period from the 1880s for a decade, where some 25,000 died, of whom virtually none were Americans. They were French and they were Jamaicans in the whole. Then you have the American Canal effort from 1904 to 1914, in which some 6,000 died, almost all of whom were from Barbados. And out of that 6,000, there were about 300 Americans who died.
So the number 35,000 is not fair at all. I thought we might actually get to 40,000. But the claim that most of these deaths were of Americans, that's where it all falls down.
Yes, completely. So we can probably say around 300 Americans died to produce the amazing engineering triumph that is the Panama Canal.
Our thanks to Matthew Parker, author of Hell's Gorge, The Battle to Build the Panama Canal. He also has a new book out very soon, which tells the story of the British Empire, both the peak of its global reach and the moment it began to topple. And that new book is called One Fine Day. That's all we have time for.